welcome, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Dog Days of Summer, or the NADOG Days of Summer, I should say, the podcast slash webcast by North American DevOps Group. Today is Tuesday, July 30th. I'm Jim Shield. I'm the founder and head of community for NADOG. With me is my co-host and friend and Marvel aficionado, Brian Dawson. Hello, Brian.
Hello, all. I'm Brian. I actually going back more DC. I see Jim as my Batman. I'm Jim's sidekick. I'm Jim's Robin. Multi-decade DevOps practitioner and technologist, and I'm really looking forward to an opportunity to talk to Marino Wijay today. He's a staff solutions architect at Kong and founder and organizer of KubeHuddle. And as I'm learning as we talk, just a longtime active practitioner and community member and community organizer. So today we'll be speaking with him about the history of platform engineering. We had some discussion last week, and I'm really excited what we're going to get. Yesterday and preparing for this. I'm really excited for what Marino has to cover today. Hello, Marino, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Oh, we have, I think we're missing your audio, Marino.
There we go. That's what happens when I double mute. But Brian, Jim, thank you so much for having me here. I am excited. I am excited to talk about that platform engineering mindset.
Awesome. Well, look, we want to make it quick and efficient for the group here, but make sure that they get some meaningful information. So let's jump right in. The first thing I'd like to ask you about is a bit of what we talked about yesterday. And that's to get your take on what has brought us to where we are with platform engineering. The way I see it is this term platform engineering, and we've talked about it a lot on NADOG, may be new and hot, but this is not necessarily a new function. So if you could share some insights kind of on how we got to where we are with platform engineering today, that'd be great.
So I'm going to try and avoid being as controversial as I can, only because some of the notions of platform engineering come about because of marketing. But let's go back. Let's go way back to a time where, someone had to buy a server because they realized that they didn't want to put an app on their computer. They wanted to create some separation from the place that they do their work from the place that actually serves up this product to the rest of the world. And you think about that for a second. We're talking about a system that's going to, give you an application that you can interact with, that you could, maybe buy something from or store some data, something that's doing something. And, as the world evolves, as more people want to consume this product, you start hitting bottlenecks, you start hitting constraints, you start hitting situations around what you can and cannot do because you're limited to this one piece of equipment. You're limited to one operating system. You're limited to a set of ports. You're limited to a finite bandwidth. And so you start to scale. You buy more of these servers, and then you realize, well, I've got 5 of these doing different things, and I've got to sit there and maintain it. I got to back them up. I got to patch them. I got to life cycle them. And in 3 years, I'm going to have to retire them and replace them with something that's not going to fall apart. It's going to be newer gear. It's going to be faster. I can consolidate more. And then comes along this concept of virtualization that helps us be a little bit more efficient with the way we can use those servers. So we're bringing on more features and capabilities, but what this is creating is so many more touch points and this need to manage different systems for our application to run. And then you throw automation into the mix. So now we get to a point where we can run a script, run some tool that will do a bunch of things for us where normally we'd have to go in and click around and do the stuff for ourselves. And we keep doing this and we iterate on this process, and then we start to see that developers want access to this stuff much sooner. Like they don't want to wait. They don't want to wait 2 weeks. They don't want to wait 2 days. They maybe want to wait like half an hour before they decide, hey, I'm going to go somewhere else and get this stuff. So now you have this element of shadow technology showing up into the space that you operate in. You can't see a lot of the things that your developers are working with because they're using systems that are outside of your purview. And then you begin to realize, okay, we need some governance. We need to get to a point where we can still give developers what they want, still give them the agility and speed that they're after, not be an impediment to that development cycle, but still have like awareness. Like we need to know what's going on. And so all of this drives what we're at today, platform engineering. But it's a combination of technology, of cultural processes, of of systems and failures, like the production systems we put in place and actually seeing how they've fallen over and failed, and then learning from those mistakes, and then moving away from this idea of, okay, finger pointing to the individual that made the mistake, and instead pointing it to the process that's actually broken that led to this failure. And so this is what platform engineering is. It's taking all of these different bits and pieces from procurement to getting it into production to the observability in between to giving access to individuals, both the consumers as well as the people that have to curate and manage this stuff, and stitching it all together.
And we do so. Yeah, it's sort of internal managed services, right? It's basically a dev team or an application team outsourcing to a centralized team. And in fact, I would sort of say, now, mind you, I'll say I founded and ran a tools and technology team at Sony PlayStation for a number of years. So I was very close to observing this benefit of centralized services. But then also the challenge, right? That sort of came amongst a wave of companies would build centralized teams, maybe move too slow for developers. Developers would stand their own stuff up. It would hit a critical point. Then you decided you need to formalize a central team to keep it in place. I don't know if across your career at Dell, et cetera, Marino, you sort of witnessed or remember that expansion and contraction and tug and pull with dev teams.
Yeah, there's devs require a lot of different things, and the last thing you'd want to be is in their way, right? Because it actually affects so many different cycles and systems in your larger organization and ecosystem. And so you try to find ways to remove that friction wherever possible. And as a result of that, you do see a lot of the push and pull. You do see a lot of, let's take on this technology, and then 2 years later, drop it because it's not working out the way you intended it to work out.
Right.
And I think through a lot of those constant learnings, like we've got to a point where we realize, okay, there are certain workloads that work a certain way that need to be in a certain place. There are other workloads that can adapt to different styles of environments. There are other workloads that just give me a place where I can land and we'll deal with it after the fact. But it also then comes back to this business need. Like the organization is going to come
Right.
back and say, look, we want to do this. We want to increase our revenue by like 5 times. Does that translate directly to technology? Not always. It could also mean that maybe the sales team needs to increase their pipeline a little bit more and close on all of that revenue. And then that's how you achieve your goals. But there's another mindset here, right? Like, let's say you have the subscription model for your application where you don't even have sales as the counterpart or that in between before that purchase gets made. Someone can, go to your website and swipe a credit card. This is the Amazon way, by the way. You swipe a credit card and now you've got access to what you need. This is that UX portion of it, that user experience. Make it easy for me. Make it so easy that, I don't have to think about going to seek those levels of approval because I don't care, right?
Right.
That's a huge part of it. I don't care. And when you have that kind of mindset in an organization, it means that you haven't empowered your teams to really understand what you're after, but also given them the right tools to be able to actually care. And that's why they're making these decisions where now platform engineering has to go in and fix the problem.
Yeah. Well, I also as a I'd say former developer, so sometimes I like to claim, I appreciate freedom, right? And I appreciate that I or my team may have unique needs. I also think we are in a world, say more so than 20 years ago, where software we are building and deploying critical systems that the success or failure of our organization depends on, right? And it makes sense that there are certain aspects of that yes, you have to have a customer centric mindset in terms of your internal developers, but as an organization, we no longer can risk I mean, in a sense, I'd say public failure in terms of our software development and delivery. We have customers' data at risk. We have security postures at risk, et cetera. Yeah, I think this is actually a great opportunity. Jim, if you want to tap in, I think you had some questions that I think align with this well.
I do, and I love this discussion around the roles itself, and because we always joke at the NADOG events about how, hey, if you ask 10 of people here to define what DevOps is or what a DevOps engineer is, you're going to get 11 or 12 different answers, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone defines it differently, and so like the evolution of these roles. I started in this space in '97 before it was even called DevOps and stuff, and like Jenkins didn't exist or anything. So people had build engineers, like that role doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
And then it evolved into like Agile and DevOps, but all those roles, just defining them is a major headache. And now with SREs and platform engineering, what do you see in terms of the platform engineering role specifically, like how it's evolved, and maybe talk a little bit about how you think it relates to or overlaps with some of those other roles, like a DevOps. A DevOps engineer, to me, is like, you define what that is, right? It doesn't really have a list of bullets of what that means. But how it overlaps most of the time with people who have that role, or people who have a site reliability engineering role. Can you talk about that a little bit, just about the evolution of that and how it compares these, and maybe even a little bit about where you think the platform engineering role is going to?
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. And for those that are listening in, if you are familiar with the term systems administrator, that's pretty much where it all started. And I see that Brian's literally smiling there because it probably lived that life too. And in that role, like what you're doing is you're upkeeping systems, but at a smaller scale, right? You have more control over these systems. You're responsible for them because you're the one that builds them. You're backing them up. You're patching them. You're giving access out to individuals. Back in my sysadmin days, I would manage an Active Directory farm and have access to network equipment. And, I would join servers to the domain. I would set up backup schedules, test my backups out and make sure that things were working, do little DR scenarios here and there. And what's interesting is that those ideas, what you would actually do, hasn't really changed much. It's just how you're moving your hands, where you're moving to, what you actually have access to physically. And, it's interesting. I say this a lot whenever I chat with people who are really jumping into the cloud right away, that we are kind of going back the other direction where we'll still consume cloud, but there's a hardware element that sits behind the scenes that a lot of people haven't really seen. If you've ever worked in a data center environment, for example, you probably would have seen a bunch of servers connected up to a switch or a set of switches that have been like VLANed out. And then you've got like the end of rack situation where you're connecting into high speed, points or endpoints that effectively just move you around the data center very quickly. And that's an evolution of what that sysadmin was, right? It's moving into a larger scale environment where now you have to be a little bit more tactful and predictive. You can't simply just throw a server somewhere and expect it to work. You kind of have to have a system. You have to have a template in place, a blueprint for how you would go out and deploy this. Because when you have this in place, this blueprint in place, now it becomes a repeatable process that can be automated, which actually brings us to this idea of the DevOps/SRE, DevOps engineer/SRE. Now, for those that are listening in, a lot of job postings out there might say they're hiring for a DevOps engineer or a site reliability engineer or even platform engineer. They're all in a lot of ways the same, but I'll break it up in that platform engineers are just the evolution of what SREs and DevOps engineers are supposed to be. They're doing a lot of things, a lot of the same things. But when you think about DevOps engineers, they're implementing a set of practices that implement observability, that implement repeatability, that implement this ability to see failure and tolerate it. So recovery from a failure. So there are a lot of different principles that you're aligning to, and you would just use technologies to implement this. Now, SREs are a little bit more proactive and reactive in a sense. They're kind of a notion to take on a little bit of the developer mindset plus a little bit more of the support mindset. So you combine those two roles together, and you're working with technologies that would show up for a DevOps engineer, but in a reactive or proactive sense. You're trying to do things to prevent a system from failing, or you're trying to do things to recover from a failure. So if you generally hear the terms like mean time to repair, that's usually closely associated with an SRE role. Now, platform engineers are just another flavor of what this all is, right? And I think where people tend to get confused is, if I'm a platform engineer, I'm likely working with Kubernetes or something to that effect, or some orchestration system. If you've ever worked with vSphere or VMware, that's you've basically been a platform engineer in that lens. If you've ever worked with OpenShift or OpenStack, you're a platform engineer. Heck, if you've ever, built a bunch of services on AWS or Google Cloud, I mean, you were effectively playing on a platform. How you consume that platform was entirely up to your processes, right? Whether you did this through the API or through the UI. Obviously, you would want to use the API to be a little bit more repeatable and take on a more GitOps style mindset, or a declarative mindset, I should say. But the consideration to think about is a DevOps engineer or a platform engineer in, let's say, late 2010s to like the early 2020s is the same as what we would see as a platform engineer. They're just a little bit more all-encompassing. Sometimes you might find these roles that ask you for a strong development background while still knowing how to work with different systems like Kubernetes or like Docker or like AWS. Some lean the other way and expect you to have a little bit more of a heavier infrastructure background with some automation or programming capabilities. Now, for those that are like thinking about, hey, how do I get a platform engineering role? If you've done any of the sysadmin, DevOps, SRE style roles, you've got all the right skills to go and execute in the platform engineering space. It's just a matter of like, how do you rework your profile to make it look that way?
Why do you think PEs is so associated with Kubernetes? Because that's the first thing I think of, like, oh, that's the guy who's managing the Kubernetes implementations.
So I think it was back in 2022. There's a company. I'm not gonna drop their name, but if you know what I'm about to say, you'll know who I'm talking about. But they started going around saying that DevOps is dead and platform engineering is the way forward, and that you needed an IDP or an internal developer platform, and that platform engineers were going to be the way to get there, to arrive at that destination. Um, and what's interesting is like, it really just became a marketing thing. Like platform engineering became more marketing heavy than it was actually a new way of doing the thing that we were doing for the last 20 years. It's just
Yeah.
another name for the same thing. And it was interesting because, all it takes is someone to be as noisy as they were, and now everyone follows. Everyone follows along and calls it platform engineering. But that doesn't mean that what you did 5 years ago in the AWS space and working with their services dismisses you or disqualifies you from being a platform engineer. Um, a lot of this has been driven by marketing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
marketing's to blame for a lot
Yeah, I
of
think
this. With the dilution of the term DevOps as well, I think is 100% a marketing thing. Everybody wanted to put a
well,
DevOps stamp on their product, and then that's how you attract talent. You put DevOps on a title, and so now I think just the definition or the real intention of what the DevOps movement gets lost on a lot of people now.
yeah, and I think that's important. And I'll actually do a quote. I mean, look, if we look back at Patrick Dubois and team when they founded DevOps Days, it was almost quite literally about bringing sysadmins, which is a name we don't really use anymore, hence why I smiled, right? And having a conference where they sat with developers to figure out problems together. So we know this, and sorry, it is a bit right. DevOps was really about this notion, this practice, this not process, but practice of dev and ops engaging and working together collaboratively, uh, so they could mitigate some of the failures, challenges they've been seeing. I do find it interesting in this case that sort of leads us to platform engineering is that the statement for it is DevOps is dead. You build it, you run it. However, the harsh reality is developers don't like dealing with infrastructure. And it is one of these where that, the CRO, the CMO jumping on the term kind of lost sight of, no, it absolutely was not about having developers run infrastructure, right? There was always an SRE or platform engineering or sysadmin like role there. It was about enabling and empowering those teams jointly, right?
That's exactly it, right? It's all about fostering collaboration. Whatever role or title you want to call it, as long as it still fosters that collaboration and removes the unnecessary silos that end up in organizations, then I think organizations have the power to move forward. I think platform engineering was a good approach to say, hey, let's tie all of these different systems together and really drive stitching or connectivity between how a database and the database team interact with, let's say, the security teams, and how they interact with the workload teams that manage Kubernetes and cloud environments that also have to interact with the networking teams.
Right.
The reality is, like, the collaboration is probably the most critical part, and that's what we've really been trying to break down for a long time. Like, without that collaboration, there's a large impediment to how product moves forward.
Right.
I uh I want to throw a curveball into this now, but before I do, I'm trying to think. I was trying to think while you were talking to Marino. We've known each other a couple of years now, right? And I've been doing community stuff for about 10 years. You've been doing it for a while. You started KubeHuddle, by the way. If anyone hasn't been to or knows about KubeHuddle, look that up. It's a great annual event. When is the next one, by the way?
So we just completed our second event in May of last year, or sorry, of this year. We
Yeah.
have a special event coming up in September, actually mid-September, called KubeHuddle Workshop Days. So it's a little bit more of a I'd say an intimate, smaller event. So if you've got a security focus or you're after solving some security challenges, reach out to me. I'll hook you up and get you in there. And one
Awesome.
of the reasons why we want to do this is, it's nice to have conferences, but it's also nice to, put your hands on keyboard and mess around a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was gonna say too, anyone that's watching either on YouTube or live here with us now, if you don't know Marino yet, you're not connected, find him on LinkedIn. He's easy to find and connect with me. He's a great guy to know, both personally and professionally. So you and I are both out in the community all the time, right? So we see the buzzwords come and go. It was GDPR a handful of years back, and then it was well, like platform engineering and Kubernetes was all the buzz. And now, of course, it's AI. So let's throw AI into the mix now. How do you see this changing or evolving the field of platform engineering even more beyond where it is? Well, I mean, it's going to affect almost everything that everyone does, right? But specifically to platform engineering, how do you see this helping or hindering what we do?
So I think at the moment, we are working through the challenges of incorrectness. So if we're using generative AI to help us, let's say, develop IAC, infrastructure as code, Terraform, or Pulumi, or something to that effect, we're looking for accuracy. We're hoping that the output of what's been given to us works, like 100% works. But the reality is it maybe works like 80% of the time, or is 80% accurate, or maybe even less than that, right? And a lot of that is due to a lack of context. The fact that some of these LLMs or GPTs don't have access to um, the public docs or the internet, right? It's the way we have to provide the right amount of context to say, look, I want you to think like an infrastructure operator, an infrastructure engineer that has decades of experience around various kinds of systems, knows OpenShift inside out, and works with APIs. And if you give it that context, now it's kind of narrowing down what you're after. And we're getting to that point where we're really fine-tuning our different systems, our LLMs, to really understand what we're after as well when we're trying to build infrastructure. So for platform engineers, that means now they're not having to sift through tons of documentation to find all the right pieces that fit. It speeds up the learning process in a lot of ways because you're not having to sit there trying to decipher what this documentation is saying. The GPT or the chat system you're using has effectively summarized it or clarified it for you. And that's going to actually unblock us in a lot of ways. We're being unblocked. That's the key part, right? How to do certain things that we didn't know how to do before and not have to go through a 5-hour course to figure out the one little detail that we need. That's effectively how it's helping us these days. Where we're getting a little bit more intelligent is that we're plugging in LLMs, large language models, and tiny forms of it in our infrastructure. So let's take Cisco, for example. Cisco's public about this because they're talking about dropping in LLMs into their hardware switches. When you have an LLM in your hardware switch and you tell it to look for certain things ahead of you going out and configuring a switch or a router, there's less of a configuration you have to do now, right? You tell it ahead of time, hey, I want you to look out for these kinds of packets. If you intercept this kind of HTTP request with these headers, block it, right? And this is just human language that we're speaking to an LLM to do certain things for us versus, let's log into the router and figure out the command that we have to set the access control list up for. None of that. And that's an example, right? There are other examples that are out there where LLMs are being baked into our phones, right? For example, the partnership that Apple and OpenAI announced earlier, I think it was in June, around how iOS 18 is going to have GPT on our phones. And with it being on our phones, like that's life-changing for us in a lot of ways too. What's going to happen is we're not going to see LLMs or AI replacing the platform engineer. It's an augment. It's there to help you. It's there to make you feel a little bit more confident in your abilities, but also unblock you because guess what? The answer is probably staring in front of you, but you don't know it. Your peer doesn't know it. And it's just something of a translation that an LLM can, decipher for you. And that's the key. That's where we're at right now. And it's going to continue down that path probably for the next year. 2 years out, though, this could be different because now we have LLMs that are so smart that could build the infrastructure for us because we've given it a set of definitions and requirements for how our application should look. So automatically it's like, oh, I'm going to go plug this in, that in, and boom. Now you've got your entire framework for how this app runs and scales and is resilient. That still doesn't mean that we don't need some human intervention to go in and review that and, make sure that it's legitimate, it's safe, that it doesn't, cause other issues down the line or impact production in other ways too. But yeah, it's there to stay. We're going to evolve. We're going to see other things come up too. Sorry, I want to just keep a little bit more on this because the one thing that we're seeing now too is more opportunities being created. This new AI industry is really creating more job opportunities. There are AI platform engineers that need specialties working with GPUs. You need to know Python or learn Python. And if you have that specialty too, now you get to play in the AI space a little bit more because you understand how to interact with APIs and how to make them work with each other. So there's a lot going on that's creating more opportunity. So platform engineers have more space here as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just jump in real quick as we get ready to shift Q&A is to say, I do think, as you called out earlier in commenting on the role and some of the attributes and needs is, I see AI empowering, but not replacing platform engineers, execs, COOs, CIOs. Please don't attempt to replace your platform engineering team with AI. One key aspect of it is the human element is key. At the end of the day, when you're servicing your critical teams to make sure that they have the infrastructure that they need to run, it's not just ticking technical boxes. It's truly also about engaging with and understanding sort of the qualitative needs of those teams and delivering those solutions. We are a long way out before AI does that. But yeah, love your comments. You spawned a lot that I would love to comment on, Marino. But I'll just say, I'm spot on, aligned with you.
Well, we are at our time here. So we're all going to stay on if you're here with us live, which all of you are. Stay on. We're going to transition into live Q&A. If you're watching us on YouTube, you're not going to be able to come with us. So just make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Join NADOG at nadog.com/join. Then you'll start receiving invitations to the live recordings and all the local Dogcast events or NADOG events. And Marino, again, thank you so much for being here and sharing with everyone. I'm really looking forward to seeing you soon in Toronto. I think I'm there in September. I'll let you know the dates and all that stuff, and we'll get together for sure. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. And now we can cue the theme music.
Drop knowledge, pure delight. DevOps chatter, turn the volume high. Brian and Jim bringing summer vibes.